Those of you that were here last year, this is actually a presentation from last year on waterproofing. It's something we all should do, how to actually waterproof your controllers and why you really should. And the basics, water's a controller, they don't mix. The reason is you end up with corrosion, electrical problems, long-term damage, even your low voltage connections, you know, our Ray-Woo connections, they do rust if you leave them in water. Water and power don't mix, electrocution, death, electric shock, it can happen and it has happened to people in the festive lighting, usually in the States. The guys over there play with 110 volts and think, you know, it won't happen to me, and there's 4 or 5 deaths a year over there from idiots going up and grabbing metal mini trees, and they're at 110 volts, they're out in the snow or water, they don't come back. Water in your connectors, you know, you get bad connectors, so 12 and 5 volt dumb lights, it's not normally a problem, but your DMX connectors are out there, they get a bit of water, they end up with some bad signals, you end up with some trees or some controllers just playing up. And water and lights don't mix. Pixels, I've got that many pixels that over the years have got water in them, they'll play up, one will fail, the rest will fail from there on. You give them a day or two of nice warm weather and surprise, surprise, they come good again. Over time, that will cause them to fail. I tend to use a decent box to house the equipment. After, well, say, you know, when we have our little afternoon chat, I've got a couple of my boxes over there, how I've set them up, how I waterproof them, how I allow airflow through the boxes. I'll just get them out and show people. And I tend to mount boxes out of the weather if I can. Honestly, there's 2 of my boxes mounted under the eaves. Every one of the rest of mine is out in the weather. So I tend to make it so that I test them, I check the boxes, I make sure there's not going to be any water, and if they do get water in them, there's a drain hole at the bottom just in case. A lot of boxes have got O-rings or a sealing foam around the front. Make sure that's in good condition. If it's not, go to Bunnings or Masters, you can usually get something to replace it with. If not, a bit of electrical tape around the outside. The box that I just opened then to show some people had electrical tape around the outside. It's a cheap box that, who was it that imported those large white boxes? That's right, it was too, yeah. We bought, it's about 30 or 40 of them in total. I got 6, I think, from memory, and they're not waterproof, so we had to work a way around them, and I'll show you after how I did it. Most boxes require airflow, as I mentioned, because you've got a couple of power supplies. If you've just got a controller in the box, it's not a problem. They can be fully sealed up. But if you've got, in my case over there, I've got 3 350 watt power supplies in there. So when they're running at 50% of their capacity, it gets quite toasty. So you need to consider airflow through the box. There's a few box examples. The top one up there was a test. A lot of us bought the Masters box, the grey one up there, and it was just to see how it handled. That's actually rain on it, or it's a sprinkler sitting above it, for 5 minutes. And you can see on the top right there, that's how much water got into the box after 5 minutes. The new box that I don't think we can get anymore, can we?
Yeah. Are those Master boxes designed to be put up like that, or they should be flat?
If they're flat,
they've actually got keyholes on the back that you can mount them onto the
yes.
wall. Yeah. Oh, okay. Some of those are fitted last night, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, that little butterfly section.
I found if I mounted them flat, they leaked even worse.
Oh, okay.
And I mean leaked like a sieve. And the beauty of mounting it like that, which is how I thought they were supposed to be mounted and how it shows it on the case, or on the little cardboard rack, was any water that was going to get out through the bottom. And as you can see, that was 5 minutes and they were full. The bottom plastic ones, which is what I use now, that was probably about 20 minutes in the rain and no water at all inside.
What's the price difference?
The Masters ones were about 20 bucks. The plastic ones were, I think, about 25.
Okay.
So, and I was getting them through a dealer in Sydney. They do and don't have supply at times. So there's about 4 different sizes. I bought 10 of the one size, and they are great.
Yeah, no, I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. There's a couple of my different setups. Yeah.
Perfect.
No, they're good. That box down the bottom is the green one that I've got up there. I've got power supply and a P12 in the box on the right hand side, and the box on the left there is P12 power supply and fuses.
You got a decent fan in that going on?
Yes.
Power supply.
Actually, the one at the bottom, the power supplies, the vents are directly opposite the power supply, so the power supply actually blows air out the bottom, out the front.
Yep.
In ones that are like the one on the right there and the one on the top left, I actually have a little 5 or 12 volt fan that I mount just in behind the actual vent at the front.
Yep.
And yeah, I've actually got 2 power supplies, a pair of a pair of P2s, fuses, and I think that's it in one of those boxes. And the thing gets to 65 degrees if no fans are on.
Yep.
I've got 2 fans, one at the bottom sucking air in, one blowing air out. It sits about 5 degrees above ambient, running at about 75% capacity. That's what you want. So, and any one of the fans can fail and it still works fine.
So that's one of the problems I think a lot of people don't realise with power supplies is that we put them in boxes and people don't think about ventilation, and it's a real bad thing to do because you're thinking of a lot of heat coming out of that and it's got nowhere to go. So what happens with a power supply is that after a period of time, if the temperature goes up so far, then the power output becomes derated. So you can come into a situation where it gets too hot to run your lights and just will shut down. So ventilation is a critical thing for everyone to be thinking about all the time, especially in our Australian environment.
What about those waterproof power supplies? Any experience with those?
The problem with them is depends on the wattage. So Ray Will has some. I've heard mixed things about them. Some people have said, yeah, they're great. Other people have said the first time it rained, they leaked.
Yeah. I've got a couple of the Ray Wu ones, wasn't impressed with them. I've got a couple of a little bit more commercial ones, and I treat them very similar to I do the Chinese 350 watt power supply. Run them at about half the actual wattage, and they're fine. Run them anymore. One of mine's got a thermal shutdown. The other one doesn't. It just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter to the point where, with my little infrared thermometer, I read, and I was drawing about 70% of its rated capacity on a hot Australian summer day, and it was reading 85 degrees. I actually walked past and could feel the heat off it and went, hang on, something wrong here. It was still going, so I would hate to have thought what would happen if, I kept it running.
Generally, I was going to say, generally I find when it comes to these weather outdoor power supplies, they're great up to 5 amps. After that, it just starts to become too much heat to dissipate. So then you've got to watch how much you sort of load them up, is what Dave was saying. If you load them up more than 50%, then...
Good quality power supplies, such as the one that you use, I'd have no problem running to 100%. A lot of the ones that we buy from China, 50% is my normal limit. And even then I probably run them at 10 or 20% because not all the lights are on at once. I'll go through later if anyone's interested on how I actually measure my current and voltage for my lights. So I can tell you on any one power supply how much current is drawn when everything's on white. And I try not to run it past about 50%, maybe 75% on something like a Mega Tree where I'm never going to turn it on white, or if it is, it's for a second or two now and then. Now getting back to power, a lot of us tend to have our controllers out in the yard. There's not too many that run them in your shed or in your garage or on your front deck. So I try to make the boxes so when I run a single 240 volt lead back to somewhere in the yard where it's protected. So in my case, all mine go back to the front deck where I've got 16 power points, or actually 4 lots of 4-way power boards. That is, everything's connected back to that one point. And it's under the front deck. It's not going to get rain unless we get horizontal rain like Ryan tends to get. So yeah, I do that simply for security. If you do need to run connectors in the yard, there are waterproof options, and I've got some photos coming up. Never ever lay power boards in the yard without some sort of protection.
You got a photo of that from your neighbour?
It's coming up. These are the examples of outdoor power boards or outdoor connections. You've got a couple of single power points up at the top left. The bottom one is a decent, I think that's a drop box. Dry box. I've got one of those at home, and they are brilliant because the cover goes down and over the top. So unless it floods from the bottom up, you're not getting water into that thing. And I think it was David ABD suggested the one on the left, right-hand side there, which is just a little stake that you can plug into the ground, and you just put your connection outside. You can see if water gets in it, and it's going to drain out the bottom, and they do work really well. This is what you don't want to do. This is a neighbour from hell, and Graham knows her because she moved up next to him or near him. On this day, it was raining. You can see all the power boards sitting out there, all the indoor rated plug backs sitting out there. And by the way, all those power boards and most of those lights are mine that she borrowed. When she offered them back, I kindly said she could keep them. So that's deadly. That didn't have a gate or a fence or anything like that to stop kids getting near that. So could you imagine what it would be like if someone's kids said, oh, look at the pretty lights, ran in there and stood next to that. She did complain that her circuit breaker kept tripping for some unusual reason. I have no idea.
You gave a dull equipment.
Yes, I did. This was a quick add-on to it for last year. It was just connections in the yard. Solder all your connections if you're running, a lot of us buy those little 15 centimetre Ray Wu plug and socket setups. You've got to connect wires to it. Solder them properly, don't twist and tape. I do twist and tape to check to see if something's connected right. But I know some people that actually, I think there's a photo coming up, that do twist and tape inside their boxes. Corrosion, mechanical stress, etc. can cause bad connections. I quite often pull the cables and something gets caught. If they're twisted around, they'll just tear. You won't find the damage until it's too late. And you don't want your show to be down for any reason. Heat shrink. Consider additional Celastic inside the heat shrink. I personally don't do it. I think that was a Aussie Phil one that he showed us with the Celastic inside the syringe. Worked brilliantly. I tried it a couple of times and it just ended up getting everywhere, so I don't. But it does work fairly well. For those that don't know how to solder and connect wires, a very, very quick demo. There's a couple of wires that you want to join together, lay them over like that, and twist them along the length of it. The reason you do it that way is, as you can see down the bottom, the twisted connection isn't any wider than the insulation, so that it means you don't have to have much larger heat shrink to go over top of it. I don't tend to do it that way. I tend to just twist the two wires and lay them over and just jam the heat shrink over it. It works. And then solder your connection. Just make sure you have a decent soldering iron, use some decent solder, and make sure that it flows right through the copper. What you want to do is don't forget to put the heat shrink on before soldering the wires, otherwise you look like that.
Put your hand up if you've done that before.
you say, I'm never going to do that again, and you do.
Also extends to putting your little,
Yes.
your rubber.
Oh, yeah.
Although there is a good little trick for those that I can tell you about.
Yeah, I've done that one. Waterproof connectors, where practical, outside. If they're inside a box and they're not going to get wet, okay, you can go ahead and use something like the 3-pin connections on the left there. I know people that use those outside, and after one season go, why don't they work anymore? Surprise, surprise. The ones on the right are what I tend to use. I've got probably about 400 sets of those in my display. The ones on the left there are I think they're Stellascapes connector on the bottom of their Stella Greens. The ones on the right are actually what I tend to use for my voltage or my high current injection. They're designed for trailers, for caravans. They're 12 or 24 volt connection, and they're usually good for around 50 amps. Even though they're not waterproof, you're talking 12, 24, even 5 volts in my case for a lot of them. They will not corrode, they won't get rubbish inside them, and they work really well.
So you buy them off Hobby King, they're an XT60 connector, they're 60 amp
Yep.
at 12 volt, so that'll do well and truly beyond
Oh yeah.
what anything we do.
I'm actually getting mine from a place in Melbourne, and I think they're about $16 for 5 pair delivered.
Yeah,
they are
Hobby King's
cheap.
Not far off the same.
Yeah, they're cheap enough.
You know, that's better than I was expecting.
Yeah,
Actually.
yeah.
They're called an Anderson connector, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Anderson
they're
plugs,
the
yeah.
Anderson plugs.
I think they also come in much larger sizes.
Yeah,
They do. I've got a 120 amp one on my trailer, or my caravan I should say, and I've got no problem. A couple of my connections are like, I think I'm drawing about 20, 25 amps out of them, and never had a problem. And they're out in the weather. Huh?
They're used in the marine industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Christmas lights in your caravan, haven't you?
No, but I actually don't have a battery anymore for some strange reason. I pulled it out to check lights. Cables. Cables need to get from inside to outside of the boxes, so consider using glands or some sort of, I won't say waterproof, but water resistant and bug resistant setup. It reduces water ingress insects and minimises the pull on the connectors, which usually go inside to power supplies, to your controllers, etc. So it just reduces the chance if you do actually pull on one of the cables, you're not going to damage anything inside the box. There's types for all budgets and needs, and box types too. There's some of the ones that are available. The ones on the left there are extremely expensive, but are fully waterproof. People like, I don't know if Milion use those, but I know Stellascapes do in a lot of their control boxes, and they are brilliant. But you're probably talking, for that setup on the left, you're probably talking about $150, $200. Whereas the ones on the right there are ones that come with one of my boxes, and they're worth next to nothing. That's what I tend to use. You can get them in various different sizes. You can put between 1 cable and 5, 6, 7 cables, depending on the size. And they're reasonably good. And yeah, I buy them by the, I think, packs of 20 or something like that off eBay for less than $1 each. Lights, many of the strings that we buy from China, they say they're IP67. Yeah, right. Make sure they're waterproof, have a look at it. They will leak eventually. Sometimes you've actually got to add your own sealant. Usually around the cable entry, sometimes around the top of the LED.
Doesn't it depend which type of one you're using? So
I,
there's 2 types, and there's the one with the resin that's injected.
yes, and the silicon filled.
Yep.
Even the resin ones, I'm finding that I'm getting leakage, usually around the LED entry end.
Yeah, so that's what I thought.
Yeah.
From the front is where
The back, I've actually got a photo coming up of some of the real old lights that were silicon filled. I ended up having to fill them with silicon at the back anyway, just to make sure. But your lights will leak unless you go for something that's much more expensive, like the Milion type or the Stellascapes type. And there's plenty of other pro grade stuff. They're designed to be outside. The Chinese ones are cheap knockoffs.
People got to realise that a lot of the lighting we use is actually comes from the signage industry. So they're not usually hung up in completely exposed areas. You know, they're put in behind panels and things like that, so they're not really exposed to the outdoor elements that much. So we sort of challenge them a bit more, and that's why they are cheap for what they are in a lot of cases, is because we're using them differently, but it just means we've just got to take some different precautions and things like that. Because for the DIY community, it's about getting the best bang for your buck. It's not about Stellascapes or Minion light. That's not the market that DIY is about. So people just need to be aware about the different thing. Personally, on my house, I use mainly strip, but the pure reason is I never like those normal string lights for those risks that were involved, because you can have them hanging up and they can get some water in from time to time. Strip is completely sealed, and you can see it. You know what I mean? So that's why I've dealt with strip mainly in my display.